Maybe I'll pick up where I left off from last week. There is joy in the air. Most evenings I spend time reading before bed, and then, sort of to unwind, I watch a little mindless TV. But this week, I was able to watch Oakland A's play baseball. There is joy in the world. But baseball isn't the theme of our reading today, not even biblical baseball. In this story, Jesus, even grieving John the Baptist's death, began to heal the sick and to preach through the afternoon and into the evening. It was a big crowd, and the people were anxious to hear him, but eventually they got hungry and they got tired. So in essence, he took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, blessed them, broke the bread, and fed them. Over the years, much has been made of just how Jesus did this. Book upon book have been written about this, and there are a couple of theories. One, he did it supernaturally. This is beyond what we would expect in nature. This theory is one that has hung around the church for the longest time. It demands faith to understand it. All of a sudden, poof, there was just bread for everybody, fish for everybody. A second theory that sprung up a couple of centuries ago is that he did it by trickery, sort of magic. He fooled everybody into thinking he had multiplied the bread and the fish, when really the disciples went into town, bought more food, and spread it around. A third theory, it's been around for the last century or so, is that the whole thing was exaggerated. There weren't really 5,000 people there. Just a bunch of people who listened to him, and they shared what they had, and everybody was fed. There are some scientific explanations. The one I like the best is that while technically there were 5 loaves of bread, each loaf had little tiny biscuits attached, and the author likened this to the biscuits his mother packed in his lunchbox, and each person got a little biscuit. But I'll tell you, I lean towards a Thanksgiving Day explanation of it because it reminds me of a Thanksgiving at my mom's house a number of years ago. There were 12 of us in the family, my family, 2 boys, my wife, both my sister's family and their daughters, my mom. But the last minute, I was talking to a friend and discovered that he and his wife had no place to go for Thanksgiving. They were planning on going to a movie, maybe eating popcorn for Thanksgiving. I said, absolutely not. You are not spending Thanksgiving in a movie theater. Come spend it with us. Well, my sister, a woman she taught with, her husband had died and passed away. And she was sort of at a loss what to do. So my sister brought her along, and she brought her 3 young daughters. Unbeknownst to us, my mom at the last minute invited a couple of her friends and figured, well, we always had leftovers so we could handle 2 extra people. All of a sudden, we had food for 12 people, and we had 23 people. Well, people started rummaging around in my mom's kitchen. The kitchen was a madhouse, so my mom, who wasn't a very good cook, in fact, she was a terrible cook, and she would admit that. She would like to say, I never saw a can I didn't like to open. She rounded up the children and paraded them out of the kitchen. In the living room, my brother-in-law constructed a fort out of a refrigerator box and some chairs and some blankets. My mom took a couple of little kids off and read to them. I led my niece outside to play catch, although I had to teach her how to throw a baseball first. You know, the step, shoulder, elbow, wrist kind of thing, which now she's teaching her 3-year-old son. My youngest son got a couple of his cousins together, and he directed a play for all of us to watch later on. And his brother was having a grand time with his uncle cooking a turkey. It was probably the weirdest Thanksgiving meal ever. But like the Jesus story, everyone was fed. But as I thought about that Thanksgiving over the years, and as I heard my family tell the story, tell it to friends and people they knew, more and more I began to understand the story of the feeding of the 5,000. See, that Thanksgiving meal wasn't about food. Sure, we had turkey that my son and his uncle cooked. We had meatloaf. We had various potato dishes that all sort of tasted the same, since both my sisters inherited their mother's cooking skills. We had 2 rice dishes that I'm sure Uncle Ben never dreamed of, but they were good. And of course, we had lime green Jell-O salad with a pear inside, which my kids and my nieces now make for their mystified kids. We did have 2 pies that my sisters bought, and my mother always had Oreo cookies and milk for dunking the Oreo cookies. But with all that food, it's clear that that Thanksgiving story isn't about food. Each person had a little slice of that day that they told people about, crawling in and out of a fort that their uncle made, standing at the stove with a huge apron, listening to their uncle talk about the time he was in the Navy, being rescued from spending a holiday at a movie theater, learning about how to throw a baseball, discovering the mystery of how to get a pear in a Jell-O salad, learning to dunk Oreo cookies, sitting in their grandmother's lap and listening to her read Where the Wild Things Are, directing and acting in your very own play about pirates devouring what? Of course, green Jell-O salad, and getting a standing ovation. And so, well, back to Jesus feeding the 5,000. That story has nothing to do with food. People heard Jesus teaching and healing, and they were probably inspired. But by the end of the day, they were hot and they were tired. They're probably grumpy. Far from home, they had a long walk ahead of them. Well, they were hungry and they were fed. And in some way, which is not important, because the story they told was not about food. They got home because of the food they ate. They got enough food to make that long trek home. You know, sometimes we look at the surface of things and we see the shiny, glittery surface, and we take that, and that's what we talk about. My family saw a disaster of a Thanksgiving meal. The family sitting on the grass, the people sitting on the grass at the shores of Galilee were hungry, and they were fed. But sometimes we need to look below the surface. My family, well, we did have a Thanksgiving meal, but the story that my kids tell about that day isn't about a disastrous day when we didn't have a perfect Thanksgiving meal. We didn't have enough food, and then suddenly we did have enough food, and we could feed everybody. The story my kids tell about that day isn't at all about food. Maybe some of those people sitting on the shore of Galilee got to wondering, now how in the world did Jesus feed us all? But others, they looked beyond the obvious question to how much joy out of a hot afternoon did we feel? How much joy came from talking and laughing with people we just met? How much joy came from watching someone with leprosy get healed? How much joy came from listening to this rabbi who taught us about love and the kingdom of God and well, yes, joy. We're facing a time of unprecedented disappointment, anger, resignation, loss of hope. And we have a choice. We can look at the surface and watch the news, bemoan the tragedy and the danger we're all facing. We can look at the surface and feel anxious and fear and sadness. Or we can look underneath the surface, into the unexpected. We can look and we can find some joy. It's there if we open our eyes and look. Where is the unexpected joy in your life? It's there. Just take a look.